I remember her like it was just yesterday. She was the kind of nurse you'd never forget, not because she was overly flashy or dramatic, but because of the warmth she brought with her every day. Her name was Evelyn, and she had worked at the hospital for longer than most of us had been alive. She had seen so many lives come and go, each one leaving an imprint on her heart. I started here as a young nurse, fresh out of school, and Evelyn was already a staple of the night shift. She had a quiet grace about her, the kind of nurse who made you feel safe even when the world outside was falling apart. Evelyn never needed to rush. She had this way of taking her time with patients, making sure they felt heard. I remember one night, a patient who had been struggling with a terminal illness. They were scared, lost, wondering what was next. Evelyn sat by their side for hours. She didn't rush them through the process, didn't give them a pat answer. She simply listened. And then, when it was time for her to leave, she gave them a hug, a simple gesture that made all the difference. She was that kind of nurse. When Evelyn retired, it was a bittersweet moment for the hospital. Her presence had been a constant. She'd seen it all, from the births of newborns to the peaceful passing of those who had lived long lives. And when she retired, we all thought it was the end of an era. The hospital felt a little quieter without her. But the thing is, she didn't really leave. Not in the way you'd expect. It started quietly, in small whispers between the newer nurses. I was on a night shift, and there was this new nurse, Megan, who had just joined the team. She was a bit jittery, fresh out of training, nervous about her first solo shift. One night, as I was walking down the hall, I overheard her talking to a colleague. "I swear I saw someone," she said, her voice full of confusion. An older woman. She walked right past me, heading toward room 301. I thought it was just a ghost or something. I stopped and asked, "What do you mean, Megan?" She looked a little embarrassed. "I know it sounds crazy, but there was this woman. I thought she was one of the senior nurses, but when I asked her if she needed help, she just smiled and kept walking." I could tell she was shaken up, so I just gave her a reassuring smile. "You're probably just exhausted, Megan. This place can play tricks on you when you're tired." But deep down, I knew what she was talking about. Over the weeks that followed, more and more nurses started mentioning the same thing. The figure of an older woman, walking the halls late at night. Some said she was checking on patients, making sure they were comfortable, or pulling blankets over them when they kicked them off in their sleep. Others said they saw her stop by a room, making sure the heart rate monitor was still functioning, adjusting the IV drip just so, before quietly walking away. One night, Megan pulled me aside again. "I saw her last night." "I know I did." She was standing at the nurse's station, watching over the patients on the floor. And then, just as I turned the corner, she disappeared. At first, I thought maybe it was just the exhaustion catching up with her. It wasn't unusual for the night shift to get a little disorienting, especially when you're alone and running on little sleep. But then something happened that made me question everything. I was finishing up my rounds, just as the clock was nearing 3 a.m. The hospital was quiet, almost eerily so. I stepped into room 212 to check on a patient who had been struggling with a severe respiratory infection. As I adjusted his oxygen mask, I heard a soft sound behind me, like footsteps. When I turned around, there, standing at the door, was Evelyn. It was only for a second, a fleeting moment, but I knew it was her. She was older now, of course, thinner, more fragile than I remembered, but I could see the same caring eyes, the same calm presence. She didn't say anything, just nodded, as if she was assuring me that everything was fine. And then, as if the hospital itself had swallowed her up, she was gone. I quickly checked the hallway, but no one was there. At first, I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. A trick of the light, or a memory from when she was still here, working alongside us. But the other nurses, the newer ones, were starting to notice it too. It wasn't just me. One night, during a particularly difficult shift, I found myself walking down a long, dimly lit hallway. It was the kind of night where you could hear the sound of your own footsteps echoing off the sterile walls, and the weight of the hours seemed to press down on you. As I reached the end of the hallway, I felt a presence behind me, a sense that I wasn't alone. I turned expecting to see another nurse, but there was no one. Then I saw her. Evelyn. She was walking slowly just as she used to, her white nurse's uniform gleaming in the dim light. She looked at me, offering that same familiar smile, the kind that always made you feel like everything would be okay, no matter how bad things seemed. "Evelyn," I whispered, my voice shaking slightly. But she didn't respond. She just nodded and then turned the corner, disappearing from view. I never told anyone about that moment, not at first. But it wasn't long before others started talking. The new nurses, the older ones too, started to mention her. There was always something about her that made the hospital feel a little warmer at night, a little safer. It wasn't the kind of thing you could easily explain. It wasn't a ghost, not in the way people think of them. It was just Evelyn, checking in on the patients as she had done for so many years. As if she couldn't bear to leave, even after her retirement, even after her death. I've seen it now many times, a fleeting glimpse, a figure at the end of the hallway, a soft rustle in the room where a patient is resting. And every time I smile to myself, knowing that Evelyn is still here, watching over us. Some might call it strange, some might call it impossible, but I know the truth. Evelyn is still a nurse, the kind of nurse who never truly leaves. And now, a huge thank you to all my amazing viewers for joining me in these bone-chilling stories. If you're new here and enjoyed getting chills down your spine, smash that like button and subscribe to venture deeper into the shadows with us. Each like fuels the darkness, bringing more chilling, haunting stories to light. Now, steady your nerves as we cruise into our next horrifying story. There's an old basement in our hospital. It's not part of the regular rounds, not really somewhere anyone would want to go. It's tucked away behind old wooden doors that creak when you push them open. No one really talks about it. It's just there. It's been years since anyone has used that basement for anything practical. Long before my time, it was a storage space for old medical supplies, equipment no one needed anymore. The shelves are still there, covered in dust and cobwebs, stacked high with forgotten boxes, and a lingering smell of mildew that never seems to leave. But what people don't talk about, and what we rarely speak of in the break room, is the nurse, the one who haunts the basement. I wasn't one to believe in anything out of the ordinary. I had worked long shifts in various parts of the hospital, but the basement? It was off limits unless you needed something from the storage down there. And even then, you'd make your trip quick, in and out. I had heard the stories when I first started here. Nurses who had been around for a while would sometimes whisper about it, but it was always in passing, a hushed comment, a glance over the shoulder. "The nurse in the basement," they'd say with a nervous laugh. "She wears old-fashioned clothing." At first, I thought it was just one of those stories. You know, the kind that gets passed around to make the night shift a little less dull. But then, it happened to me. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the hospital feels like it's holding its breath. A few patients, but nothing too serious. I was working with Sarah, a nurse who had been here for almost 15 years. We were chatting about the upcoming weekend when the conversation turned to the basement. Sarah mentioned she had gone down there to grab some old supplies, and that's when she saw it. The figure of a nurse walking between the shelves. She looked like she was from another time, Sarah said, her eyes wide as she recounted the encounter. Her uniform was old, something from back in the early 1900s. And the strangest thing? She was just walking, like she was going about her rounds, but when I called out to her, she vanished. I could feel my skepticism rising. "Are you sure it wasn't just a trick of the light, Sarah? Or maybe your mind playing tricks on you?" She shook her head, but I could see the unease in her eyes. I've worked too long to mistake a shadow for a person. I tried to dismiss it as superstition. But then, a few days later, I found myself standing in front of those old wooden basement doors. It was late, the kind of time when the hospital is mostly empty, the lights buzzing faintly above you, and the quiet feels almost unnatural. I had to grab something from storage, something we hadn't used in years. As I made my way down the creaky stairs, the air grew colder, the smell of mildew stronger. The lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the shelves. I took a deep breath and went to the back where the old supplies were kept. That's when I saw her. At first, it was just a glimpse. A figure standing near one of the rows of shelves, her back to me. Her uniform was unlike anything I had seen in years of nursing. It was an old white dress with lace trim and a cap on her head, just like the nurses used to wear back in the early 1900s. She stood motionless, as if she were waiting for something. My heart raced. I stepped forward, my feet barely making a sound against the old floorboards. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. The nurse didn't move, didn't turn. I thought maybe she hadn't heard me, or that she was one of the older staff members I hadn't recognized, so I called out again, a little louder this time. "Are you all right?" And then, just as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished. One moment, she was standing there, right in front of me, and the next, nothing. No rustle of clothing, no footsteps, just an empty space, as though she had never been there at all. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding in my chest, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I ran back upstairs, my mind racing. I knew what I had seen. I wasn't tired. I wasn't hallucinating. I had seen a nurse in vintage clothing, standing in the basement. The next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, always half expecting to see her standing there, watching from the corner of my eye. I wasn't the only one either. More and more staff members started sharing their own experiences. Some had seen her walking through the shelves. Others had caught a glimpse of her disappearing around the corner. One nurse even mentioned hearing the soft sound of footsteps, slow and steady, echoing down the hallway when no one else was supposed to be there. No one knew who she was. There were no records of a nurse from that time who had ever worked here and then passed away, at least none that could explain her presence in the basement. But we all knew something about her. It was as if she was stuck, going through the motions of a job she no longer had, walking the same old halls in the uniform she once wore, checking the supplies that were now long forgotten. Some of the older staff suggested she might have been a nurse who worked here decades ago, someone who had taken pride in their work and felt a deep connection to the hospital. Maybe she just couldn't let go. Maybe, after all these years, she still felt the need to care for the patients, to do her rounds, even if no one was watching. I don't go down to that basement anymore unless I absolutely have to. And when I do, I never linger. I've heard the footsteps, the soft rustle of old fabric, and sometimes when I'm walking through the halls late at night, I catch the faintest glimpse of someone in the distance, a figure in vintage white moving silently between the shadows. And every time, I can't help but wonder, maybe she's still there, still taking care of the hospital, even if no one notices her anymore, a nurse who could never truly leave. There are things you see in an emergency room that no one ever prepares you for. The kind of moments that stay with you long after your shift ends. The ones that haunt you when you're trying to sleep or when you're walking home in the quiet night. But there's one thing that no one could ever explain, no matter how many times they tried. It's the child, the little ghost. I've been a nurse in the ER for over a decade, and I've seen all kinds of things. The screams, the blood, the frantic chaos when the most critical of patients come rushing in. But nothing in my years here has ever come close to what I saw that night. And I'm not the only one. It's a story that's passed through the halls of the ER, a whisper among the staff, something no one talks about too openly, but we all know. It started on a quiet evening, the kind where you think it'll be just another uneventful shift. The night crew was working and we had the usual routine, checking on the patients, filling out paperwork, handling whatever came through the door. But then, something happened that none of us could explain. I was standing by the nurses' station, reviewing some charts, when I noticed a strange tug at my attention. It was out of the corner of my eye, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. Near the ER doors, just before they opened into the hallway, there was a small figure, a child. I froze for a moment, not quite believing what I was seeing. It was a little boy, no older than 6, maybe 7, wearing old, ragged clothes. His face was pale, his hair disheveled, as if he had been in some kind of accident, though he wasn't bleeding or hurt. He just stood there in the doorway, staring into the ER like he was waiting for someone. I stepped forward, thinking he was a lost child who had wandered in. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out, my voice calm but confused. But just as I took a step closer, the child vanished. I don't mean he walked away or hid behind something. He just disappeared, like a puff of smoke that was never there to begin with. I stood there feeling a chill run through me. My pulse quickened, my instincts telling me something wasn't right. I looked around, but no one else seemed to have noticed. The ER continued on as usual, the sound of beeping monitors, the murmurs of doctors and nurses. But in that moment, I knew something had happened, something that no one could explain. Later that night, I told a fellow nurse, Kate, what I had seen. She listened quietly, but I could see the skepticism in her eyes. "You're probably just tired," she said. "You've been working a lot of shifts lately." I wasn't sure if she believed me, but I knew what I had seen. I couldn't shake the image of that little boy standing there, his eyes wide and searching, as if he were lost, waiting for someone who would never come. The next few weeks were much like any other, busy, chaotic, and sometimes stressful, but something strange started happening. Other staff members began to mention seeing the same child in the same spot near the ER doors. One night, a security guard, Rob, stopped me in the hallway. "You wouldn't believe what I saw," he said, his face pale. I was on my rounds, walking past the ER doors, and there he was, that kid, standing there, just staring. But when I tried to approach him, he disappeared, just like that. I nodded slowly, my heart sinking. I've seen him too. And Rob wasn't the only one. Nurses, doctors, even patients in the ER waiting room started mentioning seeing a small child near the doors, always in the same spot, always with that same lost expression on his face, and always vanishing when someone tried to get closer. It didn't take long before people started whispering about it. The ghost child, some called him, though I don't think anyone wanted to admit it out loud. It wasn't a comforting thought, especially not in the middle of an emergency room where lives hung in the balance and every moment felt urgent. But there was something about that child, something that felt more real than the usual hospital rumors. One night, during a particularly quiet shift, I was standing by the nurse's station again when I saw him once more. This time, I was ready. I wasn't going to let him vanish again. I approached the ER doors, trying to catch a glimpse of the child before he disappeared. And there he was, standing exactly where I had seen him before, looking up at the ceiling with an expression that seemed almost confused. "Hey, it's okay," I whispered softly, my heart racing. "What do you need?" But just as I took another step closer, he turned, his little face filled with a mix of fear and longing, and disappeared before my eyes. It wasn't like the usual hospital mysteries. This wasn't a shadow or a reflection. This was something more, and somehow it felt like it had been going on for much longer than I had known. There's a feeling you get when you work in an ER for long enough. You develop a sense of who's coming, who's leaving, who's at risk. It's not magic, it's just experience. And when you work in a place that sees life and death on a daily basis, you start to realize that some things don't have an easy explanation. I don't know who that child was or why he kept appearing in the ER. I don't know if he's a spirit from the past or something more complicated. But what I do know is this: there's something about him that tugs at your heart. The way he stands there, waiting. The way he disappears when you try to approach. For a long time, I thought maybe it was a trick of the mind, something the stress of the job made us all imagine. But now, after all these years, I know it's real. That child is still here, still waiting, and I think deep down, we all know why he's never left. Maybe there's someone he's still waiting for. In our hospital, there's a waiting room that doesn't get a lot of foot traffic. It's tucked away, near the back, a quieter spot where families can wait for news on their loved ones without all the chaos of the main ER waiting area. The chairs are old, the lighting soft, and there's always a sense of calm in that room. Or at least, there was, until the visitor started showing up. It was around the time I first started working here that I heard the rumors. Nurses would whisper about it in the hallways, late at night when things were slow. "Did you hear about the visitor?" they'd ask, their voices low, almost hesitant. Some of the older staff would brush it off with a quick joke, while others would just shake their heads. I was new, and I figured it was just one of those hospital stories you hear in every place. But then, I started noticing something strange. It was on a night shift, about 2 months after I had started, when it first happened to me. I was making my rounds, checking on the patients, and everything was running smoothly. The ER was quiet for once, and I had just finished updating a chart when I glanced toward the waiting room. There was someone sitting there, a woman, in a plain coat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was sitting perfectly still, as if waiting for something, her face unreadable. At first, I didn't think much of it. We had a few visitors that night, people who came in to sit with family members or wait for an update. But then something caught my attention. I was standing near the nurse's station, filling out some paperwork, and I looked over at the waiting room again. The woman was still there. And something about her posture, the way she sat so quietly, felt wrong. It was like she wasn't quite real, like she wasn't part of the flow of life in the hospital. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that she was probably just another visitor waiting for their loved one. But as I walked past the waiting room to check on another patient, I glanced inside again, and the woman was gone. I paused for a moment, staring at the empty chairs. My mind raced. Had she gotten up and left? Had she gone into the bathroom? But I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't seen her move. The room was silent. I couldn't explain it, but I felt a chill, a quiet unease creeping up my spine. I went back to the nurse's station and told my colleague Emily about it. "Maybe she just left while you weren't looking," Emily suggested. But she didn't sound convinced either. "It's weird though. I've seen her too," the woman. She had been there, sitting calmly waiting for something. But then, just like that, she was gone. That was the first time I saw the ghostly visitor. But it wasn't the last. A few weeks later, on another slow night, I was alone in the hallway when I saw the same woman sitting in the waiting room again. This time, I decided to check. I walked past the open door, gave her a quick glance, and then went about my business. I was busy, trying to manage a few last-minute tasks before the shift ended. But when I came back around, no more than 5 minutes later, the waiting room was empty. I was certain she had been sitting there. I'd seen her with my own eyes. Yet when I looked inside, there wasn't a single soul in sight. I wasn't the only one who had experienced it. Over time, other staff members started sharing their own encounters with the visitor. Nurses, orderlies, even security guards had seen her. Some said she was dressed in simple, unremarkable clothing, a coat, a scarf, like she was waiting for someone who would never come. Others said she looked like she belonged in a different time, her clothing from decades ago. There were stories of patients who had been waiting in that same room, only to notice the woman and feel an overwhelming sense of calm. But when they turned their heads for just a moment, she was gone. No one had ever been able to explain it. She was always just there, always waiting, always calm, and then, without a trace, she vanished. The thing that made it even stranger was the fact that no one ever seemed to remember her leaving. It was like she was never really there at all, except for that brief moment when someone would glance at her and feel that nagging sense of confusion. It was as if she existed only to be seen for a brief second, just enough to leave an impression before slipping away into nothingness. It wasn't just a story anymore. It became part of the fabric of the hospital, an unspoken truth that everyone knew, but no one really talked about. The ghostly visitor wasn't malicious. She wasn't a figure who caused harm or frightened anyone. But there was something about her presence that was unsettling. She was just waiting. One evening, as I was leaving for the night, I saw the familiar empty waiting room one last time. I was about to step out the door when I glanced inside, and there she was, sitting in her usual spot, looking as calm and serene as ever. I walked past the door and turned the corner, but before I left, I couldn't resist. I had to take one last look. When I did, she was gone. Now, I don't know what to make of it. I've heard some say that she's the spirit of a loved one who never made it out of the hospital, still waiting for someone who's passed on. Others think she might be someone who used to visit the hospital regularly, perhaps a patient who waited endlessly for a loved one, but who never got the chance to say goodbye. Whatever she is, she's still there, somewhere in that empty waiting room. And every so often, when I walk past that room, I feel a strange pull, like I should look inside, because even though I don't want to, part of me wonders, is she still waiting for something? And if she is, then who exactly is she waiting for? I've worked in this hospital long enough to know that there are sounds you can't ignore. The hum of the fluorescent lights above, the steady beep of the monitors, the rustle of medical charts. You get used to these noises, and after a while, they just blend into the background. But there's one sound that still makes my heart skip a beat. One sound that doesn't fit. The laugh. It started years ago, long before I was even a part of the night shift crew. The story had already been passed around, whispered in the hallways, shared among the staff like some kind of macabre tradition. It was about a patient who had been admitted here during a particularly busy time. The details of his condition were never entirely clear. Some say it was a long-term illness, others say it was a sudden, unexpected accident. What I do know is that he was young, just a child really, though I never learned his name. He was assigned to room 309, a room that always seemed a little colder than the others, as if it was already filled with the weight of something tragic. The boy's condition worsened, and no matter how much the doctors and nurses tried, he passed away one night, quietly, without the kind of scene you might expect. His parents had left to grab a coffee, thinking they'd be back in time, but when they returned, it was too late. The boy had passed in his sleep, and with him, the hopes of all the doctors who had fought to save him. That should have been the end of it. A sad story, a tragic event. But it wasn't. The laughter started soon after. At first it was faint, just a brief sound, a high-pitched giggle, like a child playing a joke. Nurses on duty late at night would hear it in the distance, a sound that didn't seem to belong in a hospital. A laugh, innocent and pure, echoing through the halls. But when they would check the room, the boy's room, room 309, it was always empty. His bed was neatly made, the sheets still crisp from the last time they had been changed. There was no one there, no sign of any disturbance. At first, we thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe it was the stress of the job, the long hours, playing tricks on our minds. But as the weeks went by, the laughter grew more frequent. It wasn't just a soft giggle anymore. It was louder now, sometimes even a cackle, a high-pitched sound that echoed off the walls late at night. Nurses who passed by room 309 would sometimes hear it right next to them, just around the corner, as if the boy was standing there, laughing in the shadows. One night, during a particularly long shift, I was the one who heard it. It was just after midnight, the ward quiet except for the occasional shuffle of footsteps. I was walking down the hall, about to check on my patients, when I heard it. A soft, childlike laugh, like a distant memory of a game, echoing from somewhere down the corridor. I froze. The sound was unmistakable. It wasn't the kind of laugh you'd hear from an adult, but something lighter, more innocent, something playful. I glanced over at room 309, just a few doors down. It was dark, the door slightly ajar. I couldn't see anything from where I was standing, but I felt an odd pull, like something was drawing me closer. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward the door. My footsteps were quiet on the tile floor, the silence in the hallway heavy. As I passed the threshold, the laughter stopped, just as quickly as it had begun. The room was empty. I stepped inside, scanning the area with my eyes. There, on the bed, was a small toy, a stuffed bear. It had been left behind by the boy's family, a simple, soft thing that seemed so out of place in the sterile hospital room. But there was no child, no sign of anyone who could have been laughing, just the toy, sitting quietly at the foot of the bed. I didn't linger long. I wasn't afraid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, that something was there, just out of sight, lingering in the corners of the room. The next time I heard the laughter, I wasn't alone. A fellow nurse, Laura, had also started to notice it. We were both walking down the hall together, just chatting, when the laughter came again, louder this time. It echoed through the ward, like the sound of a child playing some far-off game. Laura stopped mid-sentence, her face paling as the sound filled the space between us. "Not again," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It's the boy. It's his laugh." I nodded, feeling the hair on the back of my neck stand up. We both knew what we were hearing. It was the same laugh we had heard before, the same giggle that came from nowhere. We stood there for a moment, looking at each other, unsure of what to do next. "Should we check the room?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure what to say. I didn't want to go into room 309 again. It felt wrong, like we were intruding on something that wasn't ours to understand. But the laughter, it was unmistakable. We walked down the hall together, toward the boys' room, but when we reached the door, the laughter stopped. Just like that. The hall fell silent again. We stood there for a long moment, waiting, but nothing happened. No more laughter. We never spoke about it much after that. The hospital's rules are strict about things like this. There's no room for ghost stories or superstitions in the medical field. But I know what I heard, and I'm not the only one. Some nights, when the ward is quiet and the lights are dim, you can still hear it. That high-pitched, childlike laugh echoing down the hallway. It's a sound you can't ignore, no matter how hard you try. It's the laughter of a boy who never left, a spirit who still lingers in the halls of the hospital, playing games in the dark, reminding us that sometimes, even after death, some things just don't let go. Thank you all for joining me on these journeys. Your support means everything, and I love reading your reactions and personal experiences in the comments. If these stories kept you on the edge of your seat or gave you chills, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more haunting stories. Have you ever experienced something similar? Or perhaps you have your own unexplainable story to share? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Each of your stories adds another layer to our growing community of horror enthusiasts. And if you think someone else might enjoy a good scare, don't forget to share this video with them. Stay tuned for more spine-chilling stories, and remember, sometimes the scariest tales are the ones that could happen to any of us. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, if you dare.